And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen on fire or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Dharma projita kaitravatra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu Shivadam tapa trayon mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim Vaparer Ishwaraha Sadyo Hridya Avarudyate Tra Kriti Bihi Susu Subhistakshanat. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Nigama kalpatarur galitam phalam Sukamakad amritam dravya samyutam Pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam Muhur aho bhavaka Muhur aho raska bhuvi bhavakaha. O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, verse number 47, or 46, 46. King Yudhishthira, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced, despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyasa and the Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence purported by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. The pious King Yudhishthira was mortified because of the massacre of human beings in the battle of Kurukshetra, especially on his account. Duryodhana was there on the throne, and he was doing well in his administration, and in one sense there was no need of fighting. But on the principle of justice, Yudhishthira was to replace him. The whole clique of politics centered around this point. And all the kings and residents of the whole world became involved in this fight between the rival brothers. Lord Krishna was also there on the side of King Yudhisthira. It is said in the Mahabharata, Adiparva 20, that 640 million men were killed in the 18 days of the Battle of Kurukshetra, and some hundreds of thousands were missing. Practically, this was the greatest battle in the world within 5,000 years. This mass killing simply to enthrone Maharaj Yudhisthira was too mortifying, so he tried to be convinced with evidences from histories by great sages like Vyasa and the Lord himself that the fight was just because the cause was just. Maharaj Yudhisthira would not be satisfied, even though he was instructed by the greatest personalities of the time. Krishna is designated herein as the performer of superhuman actions, but in this particular instance, neither he nor Vyasa could convince King Yudhisthira. Does it mean that he, meaning Krishna, failed to be a superhuman actor? No, certainly not. The interpretation is, now see this, when it says the interpretation is, this is called hermeneutics. This is a big word, hermeneutics. It's used by a lot of intellectuals in universities. Basically, hermeneutics means a scholarly interpretation of something. Okay. The interpretation is that the Lord is Ishvara, or the super soul in the hearts of both King Yudhisthira and Vyasa. The interpretation is that the Lord is Ishvara, or the super soul in the hearts of both King Yudhisthira and Vyasa. Performed still more superhuman action because the Lord desired it. Let's see, am I reading that correctly?
There is an apostrophe after Ishvara.
Yeah, I know.
Lord as Ishvara performed.
The interpretation is that the Lord as Ishvara, yeah, I missed that word, or the super soul in the heart of both King Yudhisthira and Vyasa, performed still more superhuman action because the Lord desired it. As super soul of King Yudhisthira, he did not allow the king to be convinced by the words of Vyasa and others, including himself, because he desired that the king hear instructions from the dying Bhismadeva, who was another great devotee of the Lord. The Lord wanted that at the last stage of his material existence, the great warrior Bhismadeva see him personally and see his beloved grandchildren, King Yudhisthira, etc., now situated on the throne, and thus pass away very peacefully. Bhismadeva was not at all satisfied to fight against the Pandavas, who were his beloved fatherless grandchildren. But the Kshatriyas are also very stern people, and therefore he was obliged to take the side of Duryodhana, because he was maintained at the expense of Duryodhana. Beside this, the Lord also desired that King Yudhisthira be pacified by the words of Bhismadeva, so that the world could see that Bhismadeva excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. So, this is something that a mundane rationalist, empiricist could never figure out. He'd say, aha, this is proof that Krishna is not God. He was not able to convince Yudhisthira. And Bhismadeva, that means Bhismadeva is God, and Krishna is not God. You see how easy it is for the empiricists, speculators, so-called scholars to make mistakes. Therefore, we never come to a conclusion without hearing the words of the Acharyas, and our immediate and most significant Acharya is Srila Prabhupada. So, there are different levels of Acharyas, Prabhupada once said. And that was when there was some controversy about his godbrother Ban Maharaj, who was an erudite a very highly educated, god brother, but he had done some things that were very, let's say, hurtful to his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he also tried to spread the movement around the world, but he failed. But Prabhupada did not fail. He succeeded, very wonderfully. So there was some controversy with his godbrother, and the devotees were sort of taking sides. Some people sided with Ban Maharaj. Some people, of course, stayed loyal to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada explained to the devotees there are different levels of acharyas. And that's why we have to practice, or we have to rely on the phalena parichate, judge from the results. The result is that Ban Maharaj tried to spread the movement, and he failed miserably. And in the end, he didn't take responsibility. He blamed it on Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Yeah, he said, your method or your program doesn't work. Very insulting, and then he sort of distanced himself from Gaudiya Math and sort of went off on his own tangent. Well, he wasn't the only one. After Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur disappeared, instead of forming the governing body commission that he wanted to manage the movement, the Gaudiya Math, they decided to all split apart, and each one becomes an acharya on his own and has his own movement. So they didn't follow Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's instructions. And Ban Maharaj was one of the leaders of that solution. And Prabhupada was not involved in that because he wasn't a big sannyasi at that time, but he just looked at the whole thing, and he was like felt very sad to see that his guru's movement was split apart like that, and because people had self-interest, therefore they wanted to have everybody has his own movement. They still call it Gaudiya Math, but each one is acharya in his own way. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted collegiate management of the movement by forming this body which he called the Governing Body Commission. So when Prabhupada started ISKCON, he established, after a couple of years, the Governing Body Commission and taught his disciples how to work together cooperatively with no one person being the acharya. He did say it's possible in the future that there will be a self-effulgent acharya. But even though that may be, he still wanted the devotees to work and cooperatively with collegial, meaning a group management of the movement. Okay, so here we see the importance of giving the final word to the acharya. And the acharya becomes acharya by simply repeating what Krishna has said, not by giving his own opinion. Right? So Krishna in the heart did not let Yudhisthira be convinced by Krishna's own discussions and Vyasadeva's discussions. And he wanted to glorify Bhismadeva. See, now Bhismadeva, if you study his life, is very interesting. All throughout his life, he had to sacrifice, and he sacrificed his personal, let's say, material happiness so that his father could marry a young, beautiful girl. Right? He had to promise that he would never get married. That's why he received the name Bhisma. Bhisma means someone who makes a very severe vow. Right? So as a young man, he promised that he would never get married so that his father could marry Satyavati, who was a very beautiful young girl. And therefore that he would never get married, he would never have children, so therefore Satyavati's children would be the heirs of the kingdom. So he completely sacrificed for his father's sense gratification, right? And then he had to see this horrible thing when Draupadi was stripped, or they tried to strip her in public, in front of all these great sages, and he had to keep quiet. He couldn't stop it. And because of that, he and Dronacharya had to be killed. And he knew it. And he was always favorable to the Pandavas, but he took the side of Duryodhana because he was being materially supported by Duryodhana. See, this is why a Brahmin should never work for somebody.
He was committed also for Hastinapur.
What?
He was also committed for protection of Hastinapur king.
That was Duryodhana and his father, Dhritarashtra. Yeah. So he was, I'd say he was conflicted. He had this. He knew what the truth was, but in certain stages, he was not able to intervene and stop the deviation that was taking place. And he had an oath of loyalty also that he gave to his mother, that he would always protect the Kuru dynasty. So here we see a person who has very strict and lofty, let's say, commitments. And because of those commitments, he also is put into this very difficult situation where he has to support someone who he knows is wrong. Right? But yet he still knows what the truth is, and he knew that he was going to be killed. And Arjuna had to ask him, "How can I kill you?" And because it was impossible to kill Bhismadev, he wasn't an ordinary human being; he was a deva, right? He was superior to everyone on that battlefield, and he explained to him how to do it. Just keep what was the name? Sakuni, yeah. Just keep Sakuni in the front because Sakuni is a woman. Sikandi, yeah. Keep her in front. Keep him in front because he's actually a woman. He's the reincarnation of Amba. Who, anyway, it's a long story, but anyway, he said just keep him in front because he's actually a woman, and we're not allowed to kill women. You see. So if you keep him in front, then you can shoot me and I'll die. And that's what Arjuna did. But he had to ask Bhismadev how to do it, and asked his permission if he could do it. And Bhismadev gave it to him. So we see there's a lot of interesting points here. This is something, if you've ever studied literature, there's Greek tragedy. And in Greek tragedies, one major theme is fate. Some people are destined to suffer. Now, why was Bhismadev destined to suffer? Because previously he was a devata called one of the 8 Vasus. And these boys were a little bit frivolous, and they stole the cow of a great sage. Now, the 8 boys stole the cow, but Bhisma was the one that actually put his hands on the cow and pulled it away. So because he put his hands on the cow and actually pulled it away, he was forced to suffer an entire lifetime. Whereas his brothers, they didn't actually touch the cow, but they just went along with it. They had to only suffer birth, and then, because birth in the womb of a mother is very stressful, and then as soon as they were born, their mother, Ganga, killed them by throwing them into the Ganga. So they only had to suffer birth, right? But he had to suffer birth and a whole life of suffering. And it was very complicated, his life. So anyway, because he remained a devotee and he actually pleased Krishna. He had a secondary rasa with the Lord. There's 5 primary rasas and another 7 secondary rasas. And one of those secondary rasas is chivalry, where you can actually fight with the Lord and give the Lord pleasure. So he fought against the Lord. He actually wounded Krishna. But Krishna actually enjoyed it. He enjoys a good fight. Just like, you see these boxers, when they're training for the big fight, they have a trainer boxer, and they actually fight, right? And but it's not the real thing, but it helps the fighter train, say, for the big fight. Anyway, Krishna likes to fight sometimes, but he doesn't fight with demons. He can easily kill the demons. He can give them a heart attack or whatever. They make a mistake and fall off a cliff, or have an accident. It's not a problem with killing demons, but he'll choose a devotee to fight with. So here we see this amazing, let's say, development where Krishna takes a subordinate position to his devotee, Bhismadeva, and gives him the credit for convincing Yudhisthira. And also, he taught Yudhisthira the Vishnu Sahasranam Sutra. That's where it comes from. And he taught him also Raja Dharma, the Dharma or the duties of a king. So, and all this while he had hundreds of arrows completely piercing his body that Arjuna shot him with, and he was stuck to the ground, right? He was a little bit off the ground because the arrows went through his body and right into the ground. And he didn't have any blood left, and he hardly had any skin left. But yet he was still alive. He was like basically a skeleton, but he was still alive. Because he could control when he would leave the body. Even though his body was completely decimated, he was still alive and he could speak. And he was composed, he was peaceful. So here we see he's an exceptional person. On the other hand, Prabhupada calls him very stern. Yeah, to be a Kshatriya, you have to be very stern because you have to go and fight and kill. It's not an easy thing. You have to act out of duty, and you have to accept suffering. When you're out there fighting, sometimes the weather is freezing cold, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's muddy, sometimes things are not going right, machines break down, the gun jams. There's so many problems on a battlefield. And then you're seeing people dying all around you, and you get wounded also, and so forth. So you have to be very stern. You can't be affected by it. You can't lose your courage. So Bhismadeva was a person like that. So the Lord desired that King Yudhisthira be pacified by the words of Bhismadeva so that the world could see that Bhismadeva excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. Well, this is the symptom of a real teacher. The real teacher teaches his disciple so that the disciple can be even better than him. But the disciple who's sincere would never claim that. They always remain the humble servant. But the teacher feels great satisfaction in seeing the success of the disciple, or the guru feels great satisfaction. And the guru is known by oftentimes the success of the disciples. Just like Gandhi. Gandhi became more famous because Martin Luther King followed him, Lanza del Vasto followed him, a whole bunch of people followed him and did big things. So therefore, that means, and look at Socrates. Socrates became even more famous because Plato was his disciple. Right? So the guru is very pleased by seeing the success of his disciples. And Bhismadeva was a a worshipper of Krishna, and therefore Krishna blessed him. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Krishna wants to give a credit to his
Devotee. Yeah.
glorify him.
Yes. Hare Krishna. Oh, that's my name.